The bull-nose Ford, or the seventh generation F-150, was introduced for the 1980 model year, and it had a number of novel items as a result. Now, this was really Ford's first pickup that was designed with aerodynamics in mind, and despite the fact that it has a pretty boxy and upright body, it does have some aerodynamic features. You'll notice, for example, that the hood has this gentle lead-in and backward sloping portion up front, and the overall kind of profile of that front end has a little bit of plan view taper, kind of tapers off on the sides, helping manage airflow. This is obviously very primitive, let's say, aerodynamics, and there's not much else to speak of. But the vehicle looks great, and these have become highly collectible trucks in recent years, particularly those that came after the minor refreshes for the 1982 model year, where they took the block Ford lettering from the hood and then just have this blue oval badge in the middle. It certainly looks cleaner. Now, the other thing I love about the front end of these is that it looks like the truck is kind of leaping forward. The front end is tilted forward at the top, and then it kind of is pulled back at the bottom. So the truck has this look to it that is a bit menacing, as well as one of motion. And you can see that a little bit better in this view, where that front end, like I said, is kind of slanted a little bit forward, giving it a sense of motion. The rest of the truck is quite boxy, and one of the things that you could get in your bullnose Ford were those dual fuel tanks. Notice the two fuel doors on the driver's side there, so you could have plenty of fuel. And here's a better view of what those tanks look like. You notice the one that's kind of the midship tank that is just inside of the frame rail. That one is 16 gallons up near the cab. And then there's the rear fuel tank, which was 19 gallons. So you had a total of 35 gallons between the two tanks. And I guess if you were towing something, you're getting probably about 10 miles per gallon. You got 350 miles of range. So it wasn't that great if you were towing something, but it was certainly better than just having the single tank, and something that endeared these Fords to a lot of people. Now, another thing many people don't know about the bullnose Fords is that Ford had the so-called twin I-beam suspension up front that was used exclusively in two-wheel drive models dating all the way back to 1965, which, by the way, was the year in which Ford had last done a full redesign of its pickup. So that redesign lasted from 1965 to 1980. Of course, the truck got various facelifts and different exterior sheet metal, but the chassis itself from 1965 to 1979 was effectively the same. In 1980, Ford would introduce an all-new chassis setup, and part of that was what Ford called the tough twin traction beam suspension, which you can see pictured in this advertisement. This was the only independent front suspension four-wheel drive pickup during this particular time frame, and it gave Ford a significant ride advantage versus the others in the pickup market. Now, this ad also mentions the longest range. We talked about the dual fuel tanks. Here, it talks about two 19-gallon fuel tanks. I guess I should have mentioned if you got the long bed, then both tanks were 19 gallons for 38 gallons total, and it says an estimated 912 highway miles. Back then, the EPA was not necessarily as rigorous in its testing as it is nowadays, but you certainly got quite a bit of range. The other thing that you'll see in this 1981 Ford ad is, notice that little logo, Built Ford Tough. The bullnose Fords were the Ford pickups that introduced that logo and the slogan that continues on to this day. So while Chevy has changed their ad campaigns a number of times for the Chevrolet pickups, Built Ford Tough was something that has been around for over 40 years. Now, another thing about the bullnose Fords is that they started to take luxury seriously in pickup trucks. Remember, before this, you didn't buy a pickup truck if you wanted just a vehicle to commute. You bought a pickup truck to work. There were not a lot of crew cabs, although you could get crew cabs. Most people just bought them to tow things, or if they had a need for them and didn't want to be driving them for any other purpose. But Ford really took the luxury pickup to a whole new level with these bullnose Fords. And admittedly, while the Lariat trim was introduced in the 1978 F-150s, the Lariat trim, by the time it came to the mid-1980s, if you take a look at this pickup, it's just so luxurious. This velour seating, very soft cloth. The door panels are lush and also lined with that same type of material. Even though this one has crank windows on the side windows, it's still a very luxurious pickup. You could get power windows, power locks, air conditioning, power steering, power brakes, big V8s, great stereo systems. Ford took luxury seriously, I would say, for the first time in this particular generation. And I think it really helped rotate Americans into believing that they could drive a pickup as an everyday vehicle, and it wasn't like you were in the penalty box. You had, again, as I mentioned, that independent front suspension that helped the overall ride quality, even with the 4x4s. And the vehicles were starting to become pretty quiet as the aerodynamics became more advanced. The wind and the wind rush and the little eddy currents that would flow around the vehicle were better managed. And so these were very pleasant vehicles in which to drive. Now, one thing that is kind of funny, in some model years, that fake wood grain that Ford used, which is an unfortunate fake burl grain. It's not convincing at all, but that's what Ford employed. It kind of turns purplish after time and some UV rays hit it. It was a defect in some of the model years for the bullnose Fords. I think in the mid-'80s, like 85, 86, is when they had this issue with the trim turning purpley. But, there's always some little defect on vehicles, and you can replace that with the fake burl wood grain from another bullnose Ford. Now, bullnose Fords were some of the last vehicles to be offered with 3-speed manual transmissions on the column, something that was really an anachronism at this point, or a throwback, because almost everything had gone to floor shifters, like this particular bullnose Ford has in this picture. But one thing that I wanted to point out is that engineers were even pretty thoughtful during this time frame with the shifters when they were on the floor. Now take a look at the linkage for the manual transmission in this F-150. And you might say, boy, that is an oddly shaped linkage. It kind of kinks one way, then kinks the other way. What in the world were Ford engineers and designers doing? And why would they have such a kink shifter? Why not just a straight line? It would seemingly make sense. Well, don't forget that during this time, a lot of people still smoked cigarettes and cigars. And one of the things that the shifter is designed for is to clear, specifically, the ashtray. And here's a photo with the ashtray extended and the shifter in the upmost position. And you can see that that's exactly where that kink is in the shifter. It's placed there in order to clear the ashtray. So engineers were thinking of everything. Nowadays, you get cup holders if you have a manual transmission that aren't even accessible because so many people don't get manual transmissions that the engineers don't really think about it. But back in the day on your F-150, they actually thought about the fact that you needed a place to put your cigarettes when the vehicle was in gear. And so, well, here you go. And perhaps it's details like that that made the F-150 the best-selling vehicle in the United States in 1982. And that was a streak that continued for decades. But it was because of these Fords and some of the thoughtful ideas like that and the good looks that really propelled it to that. By the way, part of the good looks, as I mentioned before, Ford had removed the block lettering from the hood, and it was the first time that Ford put that modern blue oval emblem in the grille. Before that, there was always kind of the block lettering, I shouldn't say always, but the block lettering spelled out on the front end of the F-150 to denote it was a Ford. 1982 was that first time you saw that modern blue oval logo right in the center of the grille. Now, another piece of trivia that many don't know is that if you get a 1980 or 1981 full-size Ford truck or Bronco, they had the so-called Swiss cheese frame. And no, this wasn't a Swiss cheese frame because it had rusted out and had holes that were created by iron oxide. No, it was a Swiss cheese frame because that was how Ford designed it for the purposes of lightning. And I think that the vehicle owners really rebelled and thought that, well, look, I need to be able to tow with my F-150, and a frame that looks like this is not going to be something that is going to enable me to tow that much. In truth, the frames really weren't that bad from a strength perspective, but in 1982, Ford would return to a solid frame design, and the Swiss cheese frames would be no more. Now, one of the things on the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of strength that Ford introduced in the bullnose Fords was the 6.9-liter International Harvester-sourced diesel engine that was introduced only in the F-250s and F-350s beginning in the 1983 model year. And it was this relationship with International Harvester and Ford that would blossom for many years to come. This was not the first diesel engine to ever go into a light-duty pickup. Chevrolet in 1978 put Oldsmobile's 5.7-liter diesel in its light-duty C10 and C20s. And that was a horrible idea because that was not a reliable diesel engine, nor was it powerful at all. And I think it's a good thing that that was relatively short-lived. Chevrolet also, in its Love truck, had a diesel engine, a 2.2-liter Isuzu diesel for the 1981 and 1982 model years. But this was the first time, I'll say, there was really a reliable, rugged diesel engine available in a light-duty vehicle or in a light-duty pickup, albeit the F-250, F-350. You'd have to wait all the way until 2018 to get the first diesel that was ever offered in an F-150, the 3-liter Power Stroke diesel. And even if you didn't want the diesel, you could get a super reliable gas engine in your bullnose Ford. The 300 cubic inch 4.9-liter inline six-cylinder engine that in 1980 made around 120 horsepower, actually made around 120 horsepower in all of the years in the bullnose Ford. I think it made 122 from 1981 to 1986. And torque in those later years was about 255 pound-feet. The 300 cubic inch six-cylinder was really all about low RPM torque. And it's a legendary engine among Ford enthusiasts because they routinely run 300,000 miles with just basic maintenance. They're simple, durable, easy to repair. And a lot of farmers and contractors actually preferred it over the small V8s as a consequence for actual work. In some years, as an example, the 300 cubic inch six-cylinder made 122 horsepower, 255 pound-feet of torque, like in this 1985 F-150. And the carbureted 302 V8 made 133 horsepower, so 11 more, but less torque, 233 pound-feet. So the V8 had more horsepower, but the inline six had more torque. And this is one of the reasons why Ford people often say the 306 won't win a race, but it'll pull your house down. And that was really true. It was a great engine. And like I said, maybe the most reliable Ford engine ever made and the most durable. Just a fantastic engine, although not super powerful when it came to the horsepower perspective, had plenty of torque. And for the 1985 model year, near the end of the bullnose Ford's run, Ford really introduced something that was, long since overdue. And that was electronic fuel injection in the 5-liter V8, in the 302 V8. So as I was mentioning before, the carbureted 5-liter V8 made 133 horsepower, 233 pound-feet of torque. When you got the EFI version of the 5-liter, it made 185 horsepower, 52 more than the carbureted variant, and 270 pound-feet of torque. That's 37 more pound-feet of torque. In addition to more power and torque, you obviously got easier cold starts, better drivability, improved fuel metering, and better performance at altitudes. And this is one of the reasons why that 1985 to 1986 bullnose F-150, particularly with this engine, is highly desirable because it's reliable and it's powerful. In fact, the carbureted 351 cubic inch V8 only made 150 horsepower in 1985. There was a high output variant that was topped off with a 4-barrel carburetor that made 210 horsepower. But still, this EFI 5-liter V8 was really a great powertrain and one that a lot of Ford truck collectors look for. And when it came to ruggedness, the bullnose Ford generation is really what launched arguably the first kind of Super Duty pickups before they were called Super Duty. You had the F-350 all the way back to 1953. Before that, Ford just named its pickups the F-1, the F-2, the F-3. The F-3 was effectively the 350. But by the time the bullnose Ford came around, this was the first time you could get an F-350 4x4 with the diesel engine that I previously mentioned, starting in 1983. So that combination is really what came together on the bullnose Fords, the F-350 combined with the 4x4 capability, combined with the diesel engine. And that's something that made them pretty legendary among individuals who had to tow for a living. And like I said, it's probably the forerunner of the Super Duty pickups today. So what do you think about the Bullnose Fords and this little bit of trivia? Did you enjoy it? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.